Now, looking more specifically at the current European debt crisis, Germany seems to be taking more of a leading role, France perhaps more of a back seat, the UK perhaps getting more and more isolated, evidenced, of course, by David Cameron's veto last year. Do you think we're seeing a new European power structure?
Well, I think that, to some extent, political power follows economic power. One of the key questions for Germany is whether it wants to use the new political power it's got, or maybe better put, how it uses that political power. Obviously, from my point of view, as someone who's quite committed to Britain's role in Europe, I'm worried when I see vetoes and Britain seeming to step back. I hope that there is a recognition since December that Britain's future, of course, is as an independent country, but it's one that's bound up with the European Union. I think that the world we're moving into is one that's going to look for global cooperation, but often that's going to start in a country's own region. China is in the first instance concerned about its own region. Britain has to be concerned about its region in Europe. And I think the development of regional structures is very, very important. However, they're not instead of global structures, they're a complement to it.
Now, talking about the regional structure in Europe, do you think we've reached a limit in terms of European integration? We've seen the problems with Greece. Now, the single market, of course, pretty widely supported, but in light of the problems over the past year or so, do you think a true fiscal union is stretching things too far?
Well, I think a fiscal union for the members of the Eurozone is inevitable. Of course, the real issue is, what do you mean by a fiscal union? Because it's not one country called the Eurozone. There'll be 17 members of the Eurozone, assuming they all stay in. But a fiscal union which recognises the responsibilities that go to all members, whether they be creditors or debtors, is very, very important. I also think that we want to take the integration of the single market further in Europe. Energy cooperation needs to be taken further. Foreign policy cooperation needs to be taken further. This isn't the road to a country called Europe. There'll always be 27, soon to be 28 countries with the entry of Croatia into the European Union. But as a unit, we can augment the voice of the individual member state, and we can also deliver economic benefit. Remember, for all that people want to write off Europe, it's the world's largest, richest single market. And that's a very, very valuable thing in global affairs.
Now, changing subjects a little, two particular events from last year made some pretty large headlines here in China. The Occupy movement in North America and Europe, as well as the riots in the UK. And a lot of people held this up as an example in the state media here in China, as well as online and in the microblogs and the forums, as an example of Western democracy not working, and this was their evidence. What would you say to that? And also, what have you learnt from these events?
I think that the Occupy movement, or movements, really reflects two things, one of which is shared with China and one of which is different with China. But maybe there are some links. The obvious shared issue is inequality. This is something that the 5-year plan that was agreed last year in China majors on as a big issue. And the Occupy movements have at the centre of their argument that Western economies aren't delivering enough for the middle classes anymore. There's too much going to the top 1%, not enough to the middle and the bottom. The second thing that the Occupy movements reflect is a sense that democracy can't only mean a vote every 4 or 5 years. People want to have their voice as well as their choice at elections. It's not only in democratic countries like the UK or the US that citizens want to have their say. The open society is spreading around the world, even if the constitutional norms or the democratic norms are different in different countries, and there are Chinese citizens who want to have their say as well.
Now, just returning to the UK to finish up, you've stepped away from frontline politics for now. If Labour does return to power in 3 years' time or so, would you consider a return to the cabinet?
3 years seems like quite a long time away. In our system, we have quite a long wait. Oppositions are sent away from power. But I still seek out platforms to make a difference, and that's really what would govern any decision I made. But I'm very passionate about the Labour Party and about the country that I come from, so certainly would always seek to serve it in one way or another.
Now, you mentioned the Labour Party. The new way, the new Labour and the third way politics, obviously made popular by Tony Blair, is fairly well known here in China. Of course, not everyone wants to continue down this path or that path. Where would you like to see the Labour Party in, say, 10 years?
Well, above all, I'd like to see it in power, in government. That would be a good symptom that we'd done the two things that are essential for any party that wants to return to power in a democratic system. One, you've got to understand why people rejected you. You've got to understand your mistakes as well as being proud of your successes. Secondly, you have to have a much clearer vision of the future and how you're going to try and change things. One of the things I think we can learn from China is the importance of medium-term strategy. Not necessarily to have 5-year plans, but there is a premium in this country on thinking to the medium and long term. And in our democratic politics, often the focus is short term. And I think success for a party that wants to go from opposition to government is to think medium to long term about what government does, about what business does, about what citizens have to do, and what are the respective relationships. So where would I like the Labour Party to be? I'd like it to be in government, because it has a clear vision of where Britain can be and what role government, private sector and citizens have to play in achieving that.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.